Welcome to the Reverie Nature Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Clifford, and in today's episode, we're connecting some dots between ultralight backpacking and bushcraft or survival skills. Now, it's fair to think that there's a big difference in heading out into the woods with bushcraft on your mind in comparison with a modern ultralight backpacking approach using the latest and greatest technologies for the outdoors. But really, I think if we explore, the definitions of bushcraft and this ultralight backpacking, there's a lot of crossover and a lot to be learned. In the Reverie Nature Podcast, you can expect to find a wide variety of topics on the nature experience, from bushcraft, survival skills, nature lore, animal tracks and sign, storytelling, nature soundscapes, and much more. These are the lessons and skills I've been teaching for decades. So before we dig in, please take a moment to subscribe and consider offering your support to the podcast. I find it fascinating how backpacking has evolved over time. Especially nowadays, there's a trend for this ultralight or minimalism approach in terms of efficiency of gear and the weight of it. This shift towards the lighter equipment has certainly made it more accessible for the outdoor enthusiasts. Meanwhile, bushcraft can complement this by focusing on the essential skills for sustained bush living, emphasizing minimal reliance on these modern tools. Both approaches highlight different aspects of the wilderness experience, though. First, let's talk about ultralight backpacking. I did go down a bit of a rabbit hole recently, digging into the ultralight world of technology and backpacking, partly because I needed to update my gear. It's obvious that, I'm not exactly going ultralight when I'm doing the more typical backpacking. I did end up on some very interesting websites and good YouTube videos and whatnot. There's one site by a person named Noel Krasomil, and he has a website called The Packable Life. Check this out. It's pretty neat. Anyway, here's a description of what he describes ultralight backpacking as, and I'm not going to do it quite word for word, but this is where I'm getting it from, and it seems to jive well with other stuff I've come across on ultralight backpacking. It's basically a minimalist practice, going as light as possible and yet having everything you need to remain comfortable, or mostly comfortable, and safe in the woods. There's a lot of talk about base weight, and that being the most important in your pack as far as going light. And what is a base weight? Those are the things that are non-perishable. The pack itself, as well as your tent, your sleeping bag, your sleeping pad. What it would not include would be things like food and fuel for your stove. And of course, backpacking, ever since the first pack probably went on someone's back, there's been motivation to go lighter. And the technology that people have used, whether it was from a more primitive sort, using lighter skins or thinner skins, lighter sticks for your pack, through to the Nelson backpack, onto the synthetics and where we're at now. There's always really been a strive to get some of that weight off your back, hasn't there? Let's jump over into bushcraft now. And I've been practicing bushcraft. I've been reading about the definitions for years now. And it's pretty hard to settle on what the modern meaning of bushcraft is. So let's take one of the gurus of bushcraft, Morris Kohansky. I should say one of the more modern gurus, 70s and 80s and 90s. A lot of our TV personalities that you see on the survival-like shows, they definitely are using the lineage through Morris Kohansky, has a book called Northern Bushcraft. Anyway, from the preface of this book, Northern Bushcraft, or this book, was written, as they state, to provide practical information on the more important crafts that are used in bush living, specific to the northern forests. So he states in the preface, it's not a manual on wilderness camping or survival, but really the basic existence skills that you need when you are in the woods or the bush. So it also talks about a minimal dependence on technology and tools. Now, on one hand, there's quite a contrast, isn't it? It's not quite the rejection of the modern technology, and yet it purposely tries to minimize the use of modern technology. Instead of modern technology, we would use the bushcraft. Bushcraft, or hunter-gatherer skills, the skills or knowledge to work with your environment. Now, here's the dilemma for me. I've been trying and playing with these bushcraft skills and primitive living skills of all sorts for many years. And let's face it, when I go into the woods and I want to practice bushcraft or go full on primitive or survival, it's a lot of work. It doesn't have to be tons of work, but you're going into an environment, you're making a shelter, you're cutting sticks for a shelter. There can be a lot of setup depending on the time of year. And that could be winter camping and making an igloo or a quincy, in other words, a snow shelter. There's a lot of work involved, and a lot of your time is spent on preparing for the evening, preparing water, for suitable drinking. Whereas the ultralight backpacking or the modern backpacking doesn't worry about that stuff, and you're probably in national parks or protected areas where you can't really do that kind of stuff anyway. Your impact would be too great. I know bushcraft and survival skills can have a very light impact if you know what you're doing, but you're not even allowed to do that kind of stuff in a park situation. You're not allowed to grab any kind of live plant and manufacture it into a tool. Whereas modern backpacking and the modern gear, that's the conveniences, isn't it? It's using the latest and greatest. You bring your stove and your fuel, you use your pots, you light up, your stove, you cook your food, you filter your water. Everything's about convenience and speed, and it makes the trip much easier. There are things you give up, though. When you're in the woods, and I've heard a backpack being called, like the astronaut's backpack. You're an alien in the environment. You can't get on with the woods, or you wouldn't survive without your modern ties, to Urbania. And that's the view of bushcrafters I think often have of modern backpackers. They're missing that primitive experience. They're surrounding themselves with the gear to help them get by in this hostile environment. I know it's not, ultralight backpackers wouldn't look at it this way, of course, but that's how some bushcrafters view it. And they're trying to reject that. And there's a lot of good reasons to reject some of these things. You want a primitive experience. What is the nature experience? Isn't it getting out to escape the modern life, to escape the cars, ideally to escape cell phones, and yes, even that GPS, unless you really need it. It could be in your backpack hidden and still be there if you actually do need it. But it's getting away from the technology and the screens and just experiencing nature. And how great to do that when you surround yourself, we're getting into the aesthetics of nature now, aren't we? Not surrounding yourself with all the synthetics and those mental ties back to the manufacturing or urban environment. And, you could go extreme on this and wear skins and, have chert or natural blades to do your bushcraft and primitive living skills. If we're talking about bushcraft and not primitive living skills, and I like all these skills, I really, really do dig into it. Bushcraft is purposely the mix of the modern and the primitive. We could just consider the primitive being the stuff that works. When the other stuff fails, it's the old school technologies that work. The friction fires, if you're good at it. How quickly do lighters fail and matches fail? All the time. I've seen it happen numerous different ways. Things that should be bomb-proof, you would think, and they just fail. Or usually it's by the user that the reason they fail. But, paper matches, Yeah, good luck with that in a damp environment. And all this talk about the aesthetics of your experience and what you surround yourself with, the old fashioned canvas packs versus the modern synthetic oil based packs. Yeah, there is an aesthetic component there, more mental ties, but let's face it, even the modern canvas pack or the old fashioned canvas pack, like cotton canvas, it does look slightly more timeless, but it came right out of a mill somewhere too, right? It was manufactured. So yeah, it's just different levels of the nature experience. There's that romantic kind of era of the woods where you're picturing folks with their wool clothing on and their old-fashioned packs. It offers a bit more of a timeless element, doesn't it, compared to the synthetics and the latest and greatest. And when we get into clothing, you can have your synthetic clothing, but compare that with wool and a little bit of moisture. Like there's all kinds of reasons why wool clothing works better in many situations and is safer and is natural and makes you feel a little less tied to the urban settings and technology. Anyway, bushcraft is not the full rejection of modern gear. It's just not. Bushcraft has long been, and we're talking about before Morris Kohansky and these more recent figures, has long been the combination of technology and traditional or primitive skills. And if you want to be safe in the woods, you really do want to have some backups, like know how to find natural shelter, know how to get water that's safe for drinking without your, fuel stove. And getting into fuel stoves versus a fire. Think of the impact on the land. Think of what you're doing. You'd be hard pressed to convince me that a fuel stove doesn't have a lot of impact. If you consider the mining and the fossil fuels you're using, just to have your stove there, let alone burning the fuel there. Compare that with burning wood. Yeah, you probably are more impactful by using firewood and whatnot and burning fires. And plus, in most parks and public areas, the places have been picked through for wood and firewood, and it's kind of hard to get a fire going anyway when it's that picked through if you're in a more popular spot. Okay, enough of that background chatter. Let's get into the process I went through recently on updating my gear, very much influenced by the ultralight. I won't call it a fad, but because it's been going on forever, but this ultralight backpacking setup that people talk about. And I quickly realized when I got the scale out and I started measuring the weight of some of the gear I'm using, and a lot of my more modern gear from the 80s and 90s is heavy. At the time, it was considered lightweight and, decent, because no one wants to be carrying heavy backpacks and stuff like that. But boy, that the gear lasted a long time, and some of it's still going, but skip forward 10, 15 years, the technology has changed. Things can be way lighter now. So let's talk about the big four. Modern backpacking, if you're not aware, there's a lot of talk about the big three or the big four. These are the things that take up weight, and bushcrafters and survivalists, pay attention. You might know this or you might not. And boy, things are changing. There's fabrics out there that are so lightweight, you can have backpacks well under 2 pounds now. And in fact, I would say around 2 pounds or under is where a full-size backpack is if you are considering ultralight packing, I should say. So if you're trying to get that base weight down to 10 pounds, yeah, you're not going to do it with like the backpacks I have, a 6-pounder and a 10-pounder. Good grief. There's much better options out there now. So let's dig into the big four. Your backpack, number 2, your tent, number 3, your sleeping system, which is your sleeping bag and your sleeping pad. They can be rolled together as one as a sleeping system and call it your big 3, or separate your pad and sleeping bag and call it the big 4. So as I mentioned, I'm focusing on backpacking, not canoe camping, where a little more weight is not a big deal. It can be, depending on the type of canoeing you're doing, and if there's a lot of portages and you're trying to do it in a single trip, that's another story. But we're talking about backpacking. So your backpack. And I'm the type of person who's collected a few backpacks. I even inherited a Trapper Nelson backpack. Search that on the internet, Trapper Nelson packs. Pretty amazing. It's actually an adaptation from more nomadic lifestyles, or I think it was from the Inuit this pack was kind of designed. But a lot of similarities. This Trapper Nelson pack had a frame, but it kept the weight of the pack or the actual gear in your pack off your back. In other words, there was airspace, so you wouldn't build up too much sweat. Good technology. There was no waist belt though. Look out. Anyway, old heavy packs like that to, like I said, my modern synthetic packs, which were ringing in at 6 and 10 pounds. I needed to get something much lighter. One of the reasons I simply don't get out backpacking as much is because of the weight of the pack. If you're lugging around a 30 and 40 or even worse backpack, 30 and 40 pounds, I should say, that's a lot of weight and it's tiring. Go out and try 10 kilometers with a 40-pound pack on. It'll be long before 10 kilometers that you will appreciate a lighter pack, I guarantee it. Anyway, digging into the backpack, there's all kinds of brands out there now, and I won't get into necessarily the brand names, but it's not that expensive to go or get near a 2-pound backpack. And we're talking one with shoulder straps and a nice waist belt that is comfortable and can carry weights of up to 25 or 30 pounds. And all in, you should be cashing in, or you should be rolling in, or below 30 ideally, with your food and all your perishables. Yes, you do have to buy into it though. If you're trying to get a backpack that's decent for under £1, I don't know about that. You're going to be paying, we're talking hundreds of dollars, probably over 500 Canadian. So, but you can get close to 2 pounds without breaking the bank. You just have to be a little choosy and search around and you'll find something. Okay, so if you can get in with a 2-pound backpack, great. I'm not going to talk about backpack fitting and all that types of stuff. That's, for the store to help you with or your own research. But a light backpack is the bomb. And I've tried making Bushcraft light backpacks using 3 sticks in a bag. And I think what was called or is starting to be called the Roy Craft backpack. That's one of Morris Kohansky's influences. Really, it's just like a 3-stick pack with a bag on it, and I think that's been used kind of forever, back to hunter-gatherer times. I've used that, and I can get it if I keep the gear inside light or limited, it's sort of comfortable, but at the same time, there's no waist belt, so you have to exclude most conveniences if you're going that route. Anyway, backpack, that's one of the big 4. If you can get your backpack weight down to 2 pounds, you're doing good. If you can go under 2 pounds, you're probably paying for it. But check your backpack. Us traditional folks or bushcrafters, when we bring backpacks, sometimes we're buying these beautiful canvas, green canvas packs with some leather on it and all the trim. Oh boy, those things are nowhere near 2 pounds. Not the ones that are going to carry much gear anyway. So if you want to get out there more often, you need the lighter gear. Otherwise, you're not going to be too motivated if you have to go out with 40 pounds, right? Keep it light, keep it simple. You'll get out there more. And isn't that the point? Join us next week as we continue this discussion on ultralight backpacking and bushcraft. Thank you for joining us on the Reverie Nature Podcast. Remember to subscribe for more captivating episodes exploring the wonders of the natural world. Until next time, may you saunter forth, embracing nature's song, and may the whispers of the wilderness linger in your heart.